The first time I heard the tapping under my bedroom window, I thought it was just a branch scraping against the house. Then it came again, slow and steady, 3 taps at a time, followed by the sound of someone breathing under the eaves. When I woke my father and described it, he didn't tell me I was imagining things. He went pale and said, "That's not a branch. That's your great-aunt's cane." Then he added, "And she was buried with it 23 years ago." I grew up in the mountains of Western Virginia, in a narrow valley where my mother's family had lived for generations. Our farmhouse sat at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by woods, old fence lines, and empty fields that turned silver whenever the fog rolled in. To outsiders, it probably looked peaceful. To us, it was just home. But there were things about that valley my family never explained clearly. There were places in the woods we were told not to step into. Certain trees we were told not to touch, and old family names that made the adults lower their voices whenever they came up in conversation. My grandmother had 9 children in that house. My mother was the 7th. By the time I was old enough to notice things, most of my aunts and uncles had moved away, but none of them had truly escaped the valley. At least, that was how my father used to describe it. He said some places did not follow you because they loved you. They followed you because they remembered what your family owed. When I was younger, I thought those were just old mountain superstitions. But ours had too many, and the adults never told them like legends. They told them like warnings. The first one I remember hearing was about my youngest aunt, long before I was born. It happened in the late 1970s, after the county started clearing parts of the old woods behind my grandmother's property. They tore down old markers, stone piles, and rotting wooden shrines that nobody officially claimed, but everyone in the valley knew were not supposed to be touched. One evening, my aunt was walking home with the man who later became her husband. They were coming down a dirt road near a huge dead oak tree when she suddenly screamed and grabbed her ankle. She said something had bitten her, but there was no animal, no snake, no insect, and no mark at first except 2 tiny red dots near her right foot. By the time she reached the farmhouse, she could barely stand. That night, her skin turned purple in places, and she fell into a coma at the hospital. Doctors could not explain it. My grandmother said that while my aunt was unconscious, she kept speaking in a voice that did not sound like her, repeating the same sentence, "I'm coming back to take him." My grandfather was not a dramatic man, but that day he did something no one in the family ever forgot. At noon, he set a small wooden table in the yard and placed a single sheet of yellow paper on top of it. Then he stood facing the woods and made a promise out loud. He said if whatever had taken hold of his daughter would let her live, he would acknowledge the debt and make peace with the land. According to my mother, there was no wind that day. The trees were still. The air was heavy and hot. But the second my grandfather finished speaking, that paper flew straight up from the table, spun once above his head, and slapped flat against his bare back so hard it left a red mark. He dropped to his knees and started crying. An hour later, the hospital called. My aunt had stabilized. She survived, but her right foot never fully recovered. For the rest of her life, she walked with a slight drag, as if something still had hold of her ankle. The second story involved another aunt, my mother's older sister. She gave birth to twin girls in a small cabin during a winter storm, with only a local midwife and a few family members there to help. The first baby came out weak but alive. The second did not. There was confusion during the delivery, and the midwife told my aunt not to push too soon. By the time the second baby was delivered, she was blue and silent. My aunt lost so much blood and strength that everyone thought she was going to die too. My grandfather ran outside into the freezing dark, climbed onto the roof of the cabin, and called her name into the wind until she opened her eyes again. The living twin grew up sickly, and the dead twin was buried beneath a small stone marker in the family orchard. Nobody liked to talk about that child, not because they forgot her, but because they were afraid she had not forgotten them. Years later, that aunt moved to Ohio and tried to leave the old ways behind. She joined a strict church, stopped visiting the family graves, and refused to let anyone speak about rituals or spirits in her home. Not long after that, she fell into a strange coma for almost a month. The doctors again had no clear explanation. Her daughters panicked and called my father back in Virginia, asking if there was anyone in the valley who could help. My father went to an old man who was known for seeing things other people could not. The old man had never been to Ohio, but he described my aunt's house room by room, including the color of the kitchen walls and the position of the stairs. Then he said there was a child in that house who had not been given a place to rest. He never said her name, but everyone knew what he meant. My father told me later that offerings were made, but he would not say exactly what they were. He only said it was something meant to give a dead child a home and a way to leave. After that, my aunt woke up. Every winter after, money was quietly sent back to Virginia so someone could make the proper offerings for the child in the orchard. My aunt's church friends never knew. The third time something touched my life directly, I was 17. It happened during my senior year of high school. A few friends and I snuck into an old orchard outside our township late one Friday night. There was a rusted gate, a broken sign, and rows of old fruit trees that had not been properly kept in decades. We were stupid. We climbed the fence, filled our jackets with fruit, laughed about getting away with it, and rode home a little after 2 in the morning. The moment I stepped into my house, a pain exploded behind my eyes so hard I dropped to the floor. It felt like pressure was building inside my skull, like something was trying to push its way out through my forehead. I remember crawling into the living room, hitting my head against the brick fireplace, because for some reason the impact gave me a few seconds of relief. My parents found me bleeding and rushed me to the emergency room. The strange part was that the pain vanished the moment we entered the hospital. The doctors ran tests and found nothing. But when my father brought me home a week later, the pain returned the second my foot touched our property. For 3 weeks, he burned herbs in my room, placed bowls of water near the bed, and whispered apologies toward the windows at night. I asked him what was happening. He told me I had stepped into a place that did not belong to me and brought something home angry. By the time I was an adult, I had heard enough stories to know my family did not treat the dead casually. We fed them on certain days. We lit candles for them. We visited graves even when the weather was bad. We did not make jokes near old family markers. We did not promise things out loud unless we meant them. And we never visited a dead relative empty-handed. That was the rule we broke in the winter of 2020. My great-aunt had died that year. She was my grandmother's sister, a quiet old woman who had lived alone in a small cottage at the edge of the valley. She never had children. My father was close to her and visited often, especially near the anniversary of her death. In the last years of her life, she walked with a heavy wooden cane that had an iron tip. You always knew she was coming because of the sound it made on the porch. Click, thump, click, thump. She hated being ignored. Even when she was alive, she would tap that cane against the floor if people talked over her. One cold evening, my family drove up to her empty cottage to clean the hearth and check on the property. We were in a hurry. It was getting dark, and the road up there was narrow and slick. Nobody brought food. Nobody brought candles. Nobody brought the small offerings my father usually prepared. We told ourselves it was just a quick visit and that we would come back properly another day. The cottage was freezing inside. Dust covered the windowsills. Her chair was still beside the fireplace, facing the door as if she had only stepped into the next room. My father cleaned the hearth in silence. My mother swept the floor. I stood near the kitchen, uncomfortable without knowing why. Before we left, my father paused at the door and looked back into the dark living room. He seemed like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. We drove home empty-handed. That night, around 11, I was in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard a sound beneath my window. At first, it was just breathing. Low, wet, and tired, like someone old was standing outside in the cold trying to catch their breath. I sat up and listened. Then came the tapping. Click, thump, click, thump. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The sound moved along the wooden porch under the eaves, stopping directly outside my bedroom wall. I told myself it was an animal, a raccoon, a dog, maybe a branch scraping the siding. I got out of bed and opened the window. The porch was empty. The yard beyond it was dark, and the trees stood completely still. I shut the window and got back into bed. 10 seconds later, it started again. Click, thump, click, thump. This time, it was closer. right under the window. Then came the breathing again, louder than before, as if whoever was out there had lifted their face toward the glass. I ran down the hall and woke my father. He was annoyed at first until I described the sound. The moment I said, "click thump," his expression changed. He sat up slowly and asked me to repeat it. I did. His face went pale. "That's her cane," he said. I did not need to ask who he meant. My mother woke up while he was putting on his coat. She asked what was wrong, and he told her we had made a mistake. We had gone to the cottage with nothing. No bread, no candle, no words, nothing. He went downstairs and lit every lamp in the parlor. My mother placed fresh bread, tea, and a small bowl of fruit on the table. My father lit 2 candles and stood facing the front windows. I remember feeling embarrassed for a moment, like we were acting out something from another century. Then the tapping started again, this time on the front porch. Click thump, click thump. Nobody moved. The sound came right up to the door and stopped. For a few seconds, all we heard was that wet, tired breathing on the other side. Then the doorknob turned once, slowly, not enough to open, just enough to make the latch shift. My father lowered his head and apologized. He said her name. He told her we had not forgotten her. He told her the food was for her, the light was for her, and the house still remembered her. His voice shook while he spoke. The breathing stayed at the door the entire time. Then the cane tapped once, only once. After that, it was gone. None of us slept that night. In the morning, the bread on the table had gone hard and gray, like it had been sitting out for weeks. One of the candles had burned all the way down, though my father swore he had put both out before sunrise. On the porch, in the frost near the door, there was one small round mark where the iron tip of a cane had pressed into the wood. That should have been the end of it. For a while, it was. We brought offerings to my great-aunt's cottage the next day and did everything properly. My father seemed calmer after that. My mother refused to talk about it. I tried to convince myself that grief had made us hear things, that old houses made strange noises in the cold, and that the mark on the porch had always been there. But a few nights ago, something happened that made me stop trying to explain my family away. My grandmother is 93 now. She can barely speak most days and spends nearly all her time in a medical bed in the central living room. Her mind comes and goes. Sometimes she remembers all of us. Sometimes she thinks my mother is still a girl. That night, the house was quiet. My father was asleep in a chair near her bed, and I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard her laugh. It was not a sick old woman's laugh. It was light and happy, almost childlike. I walked into the living room and found her sitting upright, staring through the bay windows into the dark front yard. Her eyes were wide, and she was smiling. My father woke up and rushed to her side. "Mom, what is it?" She lifted one thin hand and pointed toward the lawn. "Look at them," she whispered. "They're all here." My father looked out the window. I did too. The yard was empty. No cars, no people. Just wet grass and darkness beyond the porch light. My grandmother kept smiling. "Hundreds of them," she said. "They're dressed so beautifully. They're dancing across the grass." The room went cold. My father told her to lie back down, but she kept looking outside. Her smile began to fade. Her eyes followed something moving across the yard that we could not see. Then she whispered, "They want me to come with them." That was when I noticed the shape beside her bed. At first, I thought it was just the curtain moving. Then the shadow leaned forward, and I saw the outline of an old woman standing at the head of my grandmother's mattress. She was thin, almost transparent, with her hair pinned back the way women wore it in old family photographs. My father saw her too. He made a sound like he had been punched in the chest. The figure bent over my grandmother and placed one pale hand over her eyes. Then she whispered, soft but clear, "Go to sleep, my child. Don't look at the parade." My grandmother's smile vanished. Her body relaxed, and she sank back onto the pillow. The shape at the head of the bed faded into the wall like smoke. The next morning, my father went out before sunrise and made the proper offering at the old family markers. He would not tell me exactly what he did. He only said the parade was not meant for the living to watch. Since then, my grandmother has not mentioned the people in the yard again. The house has been quiet. No tapping under the eaves. No breathing at the windows. No footsteps on the porch. But tonight, the wind is moving through the valley, and the old beams of the house keep settling in a rhythm I do not like. Click, thump, click, thump. I used to think my family was haunted because we believed too much. Now I think belief had nothing to do with it. Some families inherit land, some inherit names, some inherit money, photographs, furniture, and stories. Ours inherited a debt, and every now and then something comes to the window to remind us it has not been paid.